Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Townsend, editor of Place Northwest. Welcome to our mayoral debate for 2021. As we count down the weeks until the elections on the 6th of May, Place Northwest is staging the region's first mayoral debate of the year, between candidates battling it out to become the Greater Manchester Mayor and those standing to become Metro Mayor of the Liverpool City region. Of course, political campaigning this year is a little bit different, having to take place as it is online rather than out in our streets and in our towns and cities. But that makes it no less exciting, and we hope that you enjoy this free-to-attend event hosted through the Remo virtual networking platform. I'd like to thank our sponsors, BECG and Savills. We've got 300 people registered today, which is phenomenal and shows how much we all really want to grill our candidates on their priorities and views and find out just how they might improve placemaking, economic and social development across the two Northwest conurbations. So don't hold back. This is your chance to find out what they're about and what they'd each do to change things. A quick bit of housekeeping for those less familiar with Remo. The networking opportunity is the big difference when compared with other platforms such as Zoom. So if you haven't already, please do create your own profile so that when someone clicks on you, they can read who you are and what you do. Don't be shy, turn on your cameras and let people see you. And to move around the room, just double click on a table and you'll be taken straight there where you can video chat with other guests. There's also private messaging through the chat button and of course the Q&A function where you'll be directing questions to our candidates that we'll weave into the discussion. Today's event is slightly different from some of our other Place Northwest conferences in that it's less about my questions to our speakers and more about giving you, our audience, a chance to engage with the candidates. So please do keep those questions coming and I'll move through as many of them as I can in the time we have available. So today's event is split into two sessions, one for each city region. The first will include Labour's Andy Burnham running for re-election as Greater Manchester Mayor, Simon Lepori from the Liberal Democrats and independent candidate Michael Elston. In the second session, we'll have Liverpool's Labour candidate and the current Metro Mayor, Steve Rotherham, the Green Party's Gary Cargill, and the Conservatives' Jade Marsden. Candidates from all of the main political parties were approached and invited to attend today's event, but unfortunately not all of them were available. Topics for debate will include housing, transport and infrastructure, development and investment, skills and unemployment, health and social care, local planning, the impact of Brexit, and more. I'll start by asking a couple of introductory questions to warm us up, and then we'll go to the audience and get the debate started. There'll also be a networking break in between the two sessions and further networking at the end. So without further ado, let's kick off. I'd like to welcome to the stage from Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, Simon Lepori, and Michael Elston. If our speakers could please activate their cameras and mics, please, if they haven't already. And to our audience, please remember to put your questions through the Q&A button. Keep them focused on the topics outlined a few minutes ago, if you could. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hi,
Hi, Michael. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Ian.
Great to have you all. Really appreciate you being here today. So, as I said, to warm us up, I'm going to just ask each candidate to give a super brief introduction of who they are personally and professionally and really why they're standing for election as mayor. I'm talking 2 to 3 minutes each, max, and I will cut you off if you go over. Andy, do you want to start?
Okay, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. A few tech problems, but sorry, finally made it through. Great to be with you all. I'm Andy Burnham. I've been Mayor of Greater Manchester now for 4 years. Before that, 16 years of Greater Manchester MP. So coming up 20 years as an elected representative in Greater Manchester. Why am I standing? I'm excited about what's happening here, the changes that we're making. The city region has been on the up in the last 4 years, making real changes happen. So I'm excited for what we can be in the future, but also about the change that we're making in politics. I think the English regions are finding their voice, and we have done through devolution in the last 4 years. Westminster on its own never gave us really everything we needed. And I think we're building something different here. And I feel very strongly that when you break out of the sort of party first approach of Westminster and you adopt a place first approach, that devolution allows, you can bring people together from all different political backgrounds and you can create something much more powerful. So I'll just finish, Sarah, by saying, what are my big ambitions as we go forward? I said when I stood first time, I want us to be the UK's leading digital city region. Well, we are officially the fastest growing digital and tech hub in Europe. It's an amazing thing for me to be able to say. We overtook Cambridge last year, so we're second to London now, and we're aiming for the top spot. We want to be the UK's leading green city region. We have an ambition of a zero carbon city region by 2038, and I can say a lot more about that today. But the other big ambition I'm putting at the heart of this election campaign is the need to create a London-style public transport system in Greater Manchester, and that time has now come, and I believe that could take us up from where we currently are to a different level as a world-class city region. So I'll leave it there, Sarah. Lots more to get into in the questions, but thanks again to Place for hosting this today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy. Great. Okay, you, Simon?
Hi, sorry, just having a cough there. Thank you very much. So my name's Simon Lepori, and I have taken over from Andy Kelly. Andy Kelly from the Telly was supposed to be our candidate this year round. However, he's had to step back because of getting a politically restricted job. I hope that I'm doing him justice and representing my party well. And I was born in Cumbria. My mother moved us down south to St Albans when I was young. I went to university in Northampton, and then I moved up to the northwest. And I've lived in Stretford for the past 15 years. I love Greater Manchester. I found my forever home, and I found my place. And I look at this city region, and like Andy, and like all of us, I think he's right when he says, when we all come together, we create something very special. Because in Greater Manchester, we do. And we can have all the political bluster here, and we can disagree on this policy or that, but we all care about Greater Manchester and making it a great place to live, beaming out to the world. And so with my experience, I've worked in health and social care for 17 years. I now work for the Liberal Democrats, and I'm proud to. And I'm proud of my history in the NHS and in private healthcare as well. My key things are restoring faith in the police. We know we've got a problem with our policing in Greater Manchester. It's making sure our health and social care is more stitched together so it works for the people of Greater Manchester. And I think we can all agree on a London-style transport system for Greater Manchester that works for us instead of against us. And homes fit for all, not just affordable, but social housing. We need to get people off those housing lists and into homes that they can also call their forever homes. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Simon. Okay, Michael?
Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm originally from Prestwich. I went to Manchester Grammar School and then the University of Birmingham. I now live in Chorlton. I'm a property landlord. And I first stood in the local elections in 2018 as the independent candidate for Chorlton. And as one of my policies at the time, I started conducting my own survey into the NHS. I invited people to write in with their own experiences of the NHS. I was particularly concerned about the use of the Liverpool care pathway, and that this region in particular didn't have enough intensive care beds. That was my focus. Very sadly, last year, the government reintroduced the Liverpool care pathway in that it sent out instructions to doctors encouraging them to end patients' lives prematurely by injecting them with morphine and midazolam and depriving them of food and water. And this was essentially to cover up the fact that this country doesn't have the capacity to treat everyone. You may find this subject very distressing, but if you've been affected by it, I've made a video which is available on my website, which is michael-elston.com. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Michael. And thanks for keeping it brief, you three. I did think that I'd have to jump in there, and but yeah. So we've probably got time for 1 or 2 questions from me for each of you, and then we'll go out to the audience. Keep your questions coming, everybody. We've got a few sent in advance, but yeah, we want it to be as lively as possible here. Chance for a debate. So Simon, first of all, looking in, do you think that overall, this is quite a general question, that the mayoral model has been a success in Greater Manchester, and why? And if not, why not?
So I'm one of those rare Liberal Democrats that actually agreed with the city region mayors. I don't necessarily agree with the Police and Crime Commissioner. I think that's actually turned out to be a failed experiment. However, having city region mayors can actually bring that focus in to a city region. And I think that's one of the primary positives. I mean, for all the bluster, and for all the memes, for all the chants of Andy's the king in the north, he got on the news and he made Manchester top billing on 6 o'clock news throughout the pandemic. And, that's something that is a success, because people know that we're going to stand up for ourselves, and anybody going into the role of mayor should always expect that and say, actually, I'm going to stand up for Greater Manchester, and I am going to upset people when I stand up and say something, and that's okay, because as long as Greater Manchester is getting spoken about and getting noticed, it means no one's forgetting us. And I think, as alluded to in Andy's opening statement, I think Greater Manchester and the North in general has been forgotten for many years. And under all stripes of party, I think it was just taken for granted. And yeah, so that would be my point.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Andy, do you want to come in on that? And do you think it's been a success? But also, from your experience, there's been a lot of talk about levelling up. You've written a couple of articles in the last week about levelling up, and not enough progress, as you've said in your words, has been made on levelling up. Why do you think this is? And is there sort of one additional power that you'd like from Whitehall if you could do the job better?
There's more than one, I'll be honest, Sarah. And I think it's important to say that this is a system in development. It's not the finished article yet. And one of the difficult things about doing this job in the last 4 years has been, I've sometimes had the sort of responsibility without the power, if I could put it that way. And people have called on me to change all kinds of things, and I haven't necessarily had the levers to respond to all of those issues. So, where I think the Mayor of Greater Manchester needs more power would be over the skills system, would be a very kind of prime candidate for that, over all of the transport system, because we control some of it, but not all of it. We can maybe get onto some of that later. I think we should control DWP more, because I think that is an area we could get more value for public money. And the bit of devolution we have over that, we're making work better. But I agree with Simon. I mean, whoever does the job, and Steve's done this in Liverpool and other mayors in other parts of the country, you can, when you are elected by 3 million people, you've got the ability to speak for those people and get the voice of the region heard in a way that an individual MP isn't really able to do, because they're focusing on a much more smaller patch of land. So, I think the Greater Manchester model is the right model. On policing, it's been challenging. We obviously had a police force that had been hit by cuts for a number of years, and then the arena incident happened, and so they've had a tough time. My job is not to run the police, but to hold them to account, and we are working through those issues now, and we're making the changes. And so everything's not going to run perfectly all of the time, but I think what we have got now is a functional model of city region governance that is beginning to make real change happen. We've reduced the homelessness rough sleeping figures by a very big margin. We've provided more support for our young people. We've made a lot of changes with the fairly restricted level of powers that we've got. I would just say, imagine what this city region can achieve if you really back it with devolved powers and funding. Honestly, I think there's so much more we could be. We're going places, but we could go so much further if levelling up became, a sort of the full-throated version of levelling up, rather than this sort of slightly halfway house that we've got at the moment. So people often ask me, am I biding my time to plot a route back to Westminster? Well, the answer is no. If we see Westminster as the only show in town, we will get more of the same, which is what Simon said, a very uneven country where, all the parties in government haven't looked after the North properly. The answer is not to kind of keep waiting for Westminster to change its ways. The answer is to take more control of our own destiny through devolution, build strong partnerships with business, which is what you can do in a model that's based more on place rather than party. And that's what I've tried to do in the last 4 years. So I would say, nothing's perfect in life, but it's really beginning to get the voice of Greater Manchester heard. It's starting to rebalance the country, but we're at the end of the beginning rather than the beginning of the end. We've made a good start, but there's now so much more that we can do.
Sure. Okay, thanks, Andy. Michael, what's your take on this, and how would you sort of seek to improve or ramp up the levelling up kind of agenda if you were to get in power?
Well, in terms of levelling up, my priority is first to level up Greater Manchester. At the moment, we have a Manchester-centric Greater Manchester. A lot of our other towns are very much neglected. I want to make all of Greater Manchester a desirable place in which to live and in which to work. In terms of, I want to bring in business, I want to bring in manufacturing. I was speaking earlier about there are companies now manufacturing sustainable building materials. We don't have them here in Greater Manchester. We have companies using reconstituted glass as building aggregates, using recycled plastic, manufacturing roof felt, sustainable roof felt insulation. They seem to be predominantly in South Wales or in Scotland. So in terms of, we have two problems. If we're looking to cut on carbon emissions, transporting them all that distance isn't exactly helping matters. And then at the moment, the price of these products is probably about 15 to 20 times the cost of the most widely used building materials at the moment. So I want to bring these type of innovative manufacturing industries here to Greater Manchester, incentivize them to come here, build the skills here in Greater Manchester so we have them readily available. And of course, in the not too distant future, it may well be that the government brings in regulations to encourage the use of these materials. I want Greater Manchester to be ahead of the game and to have them here already.
Sure. When you talk about incentivising, then greening up construction, incentivising sort of more local manufacturing operations, what would those incentives look like? Do you know at this point? What kind of policies would this include?
Yeah, I think there are lots of things we can do. We've seen recently free ports. Liverpool's had a free port. I'm very much in favour of innovation. In the last few years, there's been tremendous innovation in the manufacturing of airships. This in the future is going to become a very real possibility, so that we can use airships for cargo transport. There's the potential to have a free airship port here in Greater Manchester, and to use it as an incentive to become a hub of the manufacturing of sustainable building materials.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thanks, Michael. We've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience, which is great. Before we completely sort of throw it out there, I've just, I think there's one massive subject that would be good to sort of address early and kind of cover that off. And yes, you've guessed it, it's the GMSF. Simon, you've got strong opinions about the GMSF, as does everyone, I think, to be honest, and have said the city region needs a proper local community-led plans. So how would you resolve the GMSF challenge if you were to come into power?
I mean, let's be clear with this. I'm not blaming anyone for this. It's one of those things that is being used to bash each other with. But we've got 2014 figures deciding housing for the next 15 years. The fact that it's dragged on for the past 6 years of this plan in whatever form, the fact that it wasn't based on local communities, it was based on councils and the combined authority saying, this is what we need to do, this is how we're going to do it. And I think that's the disconnect with it. And that's why it's got so many people angry and worked up. And we can call this NIMBYism, or we can say, oh, it's environmentalism gone mad, or we can actually get back to basics and say, you didn't include people at the beginning properly. You didn't include communities. And you didn't say to a place like Timperley, for instance, that have always said building on Timperley Wedge would not be suitable for them because it would just add more traffic, more pollution, and let alone the people and the services that would require. But I mean, you look at Carrington Moss, and is it appropriate to build on that peat moss? We know it's been flooded over the past few months in the storms that we've had. What's that going to look like when we start building on it? I think that's mirrored across Greater Manchester. I mean, on the other side of it, there is all these brownfield sites, and we talk about brownfield first. We know it's expensive to clean up the brownfield sites. We know developers aren't necessarily enthused because it costs more money. It's easier to build on a greenfield than it is on a brownfield. But if we could actually work with developers and work with government and actually say, can we set up something that makes it easier for developers, even more so than it is now, to actually develop these brownfield sites? And I mean, we know for a fact as well that councils and individuals have got land that they're not doing anything with in our town centres, in our city centres, and around some of our transport junctions. But yeah, so I'm waiting for someone to come in and interrupt me.
Well, I'm going to go to Andy now and sort of get his view. So from your point of view, Andy, what has gone wrong with the GMSF? Why has it been so tough to get it over the line? Is it time to ditch it entirely and let boroughs get on with their own local plans?
I honestly think what's gone wrong with it is quite parochial politicking, unfortunately, quite opportunistic politics. Well, actually, there's a serious commitment from myself and the 10 leaders to bring through a plan. It's our view that post-pandemic, Greater Manchester needs a plan. We need to be clear about where we want to see inward investment. To rip it up now, I think, is a major mistake. It's easy to demonise the GMSF, but it's a massively radically changed document from the one that we had at the last mayoral election. There's been a 60% reduction in greenbelt take, and that actually has been through listening to communities in the way that Simon rightly says we should do. But we have been doing that, and we've made changes. We've removed sites on the back of their representations. We've consulted, and so at some point, this is never going to please by definition. So everyone has to compromise. I think, if I'm honest, in Stockport, we just saw straightforward. People were calculating about seats they could win in May, and that's why they did what they did. There's no other explanation for it, because under the GMSF, Stockport is able to build below its housing target. Because one of the things the GMSF did in its old form was redistribute the numbers. So Manchester and Salford build above target, therefore allowing Salford to build below. And by kind of voting it down, they were voting to build 5,000 more homes in Stockport. So there's just been a lot of, I think, quite opportunistic politics played with it. I think I'm the only candidate in the election backing the plan of 9 districts that we are bringing forward now, places for everyone. I think that gives people a pretty clear choice at the election. And to just pick up on what Michael was saying a moment ago, it's just not the case that it's all about Manchester-centric. The whole point of the GMSF is to is to rebalance Greater Manchester and address Greater Manchester's own north-south divide, which is what we have with the Northern Gateway development. And also, if you look at what we have actually done in Stockport with the creation of the first mayoral development corporation in the country focused on a town centre, I think what you can see there is really innovative ways of rethinking our towns, building more homes connected to public transport as opposed to building for the car. So we are actually bringing through some innovative thinking of the kind that the public has rightly been calling for. But no, absolutely, we will press on. I'll make this very clear at this event today and going forward. We will press on with the plan of the 9 boroughs who still want to be part of it, because I think to kind of abandon it at this point, it would leave a vacuum and it would leave Greater Manchester with no clear direction, just when we need to be addressing recovery in a very, very direct way coming out of the pandemic. So that's my position. We've listened to what people are saying. We've changed the plan. It is still going forward as a plan of the 9, and I am absolutely convinced that it's the right thing to do, not least for our climate ambitions, because it sets the date of 2028 for zero carbon buildings. It's got a whole range of other green policies within it that we need to embrace. So the GMSF is more than land allocation. There's some very important policies that are crucial to our future direction.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I'm going to move on to some audience questions now. I think Michael has kind of addressed this first one from Matthew Hard. Is there a risk that the city region is too focused on Manchester city centre to the detriment of outlying towns, especially those beyond the M60? So do you think this, Michael, then? Is this something you'd want to change?
There are huge swathes of Greater Manchester that have been neglected for as long as I can remember. And we have some potentially very attractive town centres that have been neglected. And the residential developments we have are so often isolated. And I think it's key, in terms of the spatial framework, not just identifying plots of land for development, but thinking how are we going to integrate those developments into their own localities and into a cohesive Greater Manchester as a whole.
Okay, thanks, Michael. I'm going to come on to the climate change point in a sec. Just one final GMSF question, and it's for Simon, and it's from Jeremy Hines from Savills. So he says, I am a fully paid up member of the Lib Dems, pay additional monthly subs and have given money to Lib Dem candidates elsewhere in the country. You'd expect that you, i.e. Simon, should have at least one vote from this audience. Therefore, how can I explain to others that the Lib Dems should be taken seriously in their ambitions to work for the greater good of Greater Manchester as a whole, in the aftermath of the decision of the Lib Dems in Stockport to reject the GMSF and their rebuff of the overtures from Andy and his office? Lib Dem councillors Lisa Smart and Mark Hunter argued that the decision was, and I quote, based on what is best for Stockport. This is quite a long question, Simon, you're following. Will the Lib Dems take a wider view of the need for a collegiate approach to citywide government? And what is the party now doing to support the new process, the places for everyone forced upon, he says, the other borough of Greater Manchester?
Yeah, it's thank you for the question, by the way, to the member. It is odd, and I think it goes back to that community approach, and that's the building block that was left out at the beginning before even Andy got hold of it, to be fair, and has led to some of that acrimony. I see, and I do respect the politicking accusation of it, but when you've got local residents coming to you and saying, we're not going to be able to cope as a community if you build these here, it's going to overwhelm us. It's going to change the very nature of our community. How will we work with the new plan of course we'll scrutinise it, of course we'll question it, of course we'll ask, well, where's the provision for active travel? Where's the public transport provision? Where's the healthcare provision? How are you going to make sure that the police and fire service are integrated into that community? How are you going to make sure there's social services and elderly care services in that community that you're going to build? Because these aren't just, 50 houses. These are big blocks of 1,000 houses in some cases, 2,000 houses, 3,000 houses. These are going to be communities in themselves. That's where the next stage is. If we're not going to scrap it, if we're not going to go back to the drawing board, then we have to scrutinise the plan, and we have to scrutinise what comes throughout the development and what comes afterwards, and how we make those communities integrate and successful and prosperous for the people that choose to live in them. And one of the big criticisms of these communities is what type of housing is being built. I mean, yes, I live in a 2-up, 2-down terrace, and I'm proud of it, and I'm happy to live here in the middle of Stretford in that type of house. In these fields, they're going to build 4-bedroom executive housing that I'm not going to be able to afford. Lots of my friends aren't going to be able to afford, and I'm 40, by the way. I'm not in my 20s, just turned 40. I'm not going to be able to afford that. My former colleagues in the NHS aren't going to be able to afford those houses. Who's going to be living there, and how much debt are they going to be in? And if they're in so much mortgage debt, what good are they going to be to the wider economy if they're not going to be able to go out and actually enjoy going to the theatre or going to the shops, if they're spending every last penny on their mortgage and every last hour working? That doesn't create a wellness balance for Greater Manchester. We still have people on housing waiting lists. We actually need social housing, and we're always talking about it, but we actually need social housing. We need housing associations and councils to actually rebuild some of the council housing stock that we lost in the 80s. I will never deny someone the right to buy the house.
Simon, I'm going to have to wrap you up there just to give the others a chance to speak as well. But I think the housing point is a good one, and we've had a question from the audience. Charlotte Woods at Lexington, using Wigan as an example, house prices went up 12% last year alone. If we're to build a great city region, we need to make sure our housing is accessible for young people. What's the solution? I wonder, Michael, what do you think about the housing point, and in terms of the provision of a diverse range of housing for all demographics and incomes?
In terms of providing affordable housing, I think we have lots of town centres that are ripe for redevelopment. And we often see, in Levenshulme at the moment, it was a bit downtrodden a few years ago. It's becoming a very trendy place for young professionals. There are lots of our little towns that I think we can develop and turn into very attractive and desirable locations to live.
Okay.
The
Thanks, Michael.
It's local people that have made those communities flourish. That there has been some investment by councils, but it has been the people moving into those areas that have said, we want better in these areas, and have made it happen. That's what happened in Chorlton. 25, 30 years ago, the local people actually said, we want something better in Chorlton, and rebuilt Chorlton to what it is now. And that's what we're seeing in Levenshulme. It's what we're seeing in Stretford. People are moving in, and local people are actually getting engaged in the area.
Andy, I wonder what you make of this. How have you guys done? Since you've been in power, have you done enough to try and reduce some of the inequalities in terms of housing offer across the city region? I'm sure we all saw Manctopia, which raised loads of questions about that. And I wonder, if you were to be re-elected, what would you be doing to ramp that up and close the gap?
Well, we could certainly do more, Sarah, to answer that honestly. Manctopia, I think, was it's not necessarily a bad thing, by the way, because I don't know, I'm excited by the city centre and what it's becoming at the moment. But we have been trying to focus more on affordable housing exactly the way that Michael and Simon described. So Paul Dennett, City Mayor of Salford, who leads on housing for us, has developed a plan for 50,000 truly affordable homes on a Manchester definition of affordability, and within that 30,000 homes for social rent. And Michael's right, there is potential in our town centres. The retail space there is not going to be needed in the way that it once was. I think the time has come now to substantially remodel many of the outlying surrounding towns of Greater Manchester, and Stockport is the prime example with the Stockport Mayoral Development Corporation. But if you look towards the north and look at what's going on in Rochdale Town Centre, that's quite exciting, and you see the change that's taking place there. So I think that is the answer. It's building more higher density development in town centres with the cycling and walking infrastructure built in, as Simon is saying, as it is in Stockport. And building homes connected for public transport rather than homes for the car. That's absolutely the vision that I've promoted. And I've said to the other 9 districts, we can have mayoral development corporations in all of the other boroughs, because obviously it can speed up the process of remodeling these places. It can make it easier. And obviously when you've got somebody of the stature of Lord Kerslake chairing the Stockport Mayoral Development Corporation, it gets national attention. So yes, that is the future. And that's what the redrawn spatial plan has been trying to do, to shift the burden away from a greenfield first approach to thinking about town centres. And I think we've got even more scope to do that post-pandemic.
Okay, thanks, Andy. On the transport point, just this week, well, at the weekend, there was indications that the bus reforms, towards franchising, you've been basically recommended to approve that plan. What are you going to do?
Yes, there is a decision looming, and I can't answer your question directly because I'm in the position where I'm considering the arguments carefully. Whichever way we go, though, we know what we want, and it's that London-style public transport system. So let me just kind of make it real for people. What does that mean? It means in a 3 to 5 year window, having a fully integrated bus and tram system. So effectively, if you like, Metrolink becoming a system that covers bus and tram, is all hopefully all electric, has a daily cap over what people can spend, all in the same livery. That's what we're working towards, because that will allow people to move around Greater Manchester in a very different way to the way that they currently move. People, if they want to use public transport, have to be loyal to one mode, because the minute you switch modes, you pay again as though you're a new customer, obviously, which doesn't happen in London. And there's no daily cap here as there is in London. So what that means is the car becomes people's first port of call. It's more reliable, it's often cheaper for people, and we all experience the levels of congestion that arise as a result of that. So a London-style public transport system for Greater Manchester is the big thing that will take us from where we are to the next level. More affordable, more reliable, zero emissions. I think it's a fantastic vision, and I think we've proven we can do it with Metrolink, because Metrolink is a great success. It's about applying Metrolink standards and principles to the bus system and integrating the two of them, and that's our vision, Sarah.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Okay, so that does also link into the climate emergency question. And Simon, I know this is a big sort of point for you. Ramping up the sort of quest for zero carbon. Can you say what exactly would you like to do if you were to get into power to sort of to ensure that, as Deborah McConnell says, the climate emergency is woven through every decision made by the mayoral team?
Yeah, well, I think as Andy's just said, I mean, this is something we've been speaking about in Greater Manchester for years, for as long as I've lived here. Why can't you have one ticket to go on everything? It will make it so much easier. Buses going where we actually need them and not congesting routes. Electric buses. So I'm happy to hear that come from him today. To answer the question, green issues, the green revolution, the green industrial future, the the green living future, whatever you want to call it. It's happening, it's here. We are in a climate emergency. We have to face up to it and we have to deal with it. One of the big things that we can do as a city region is deal with our waste. It's not a sexy topic. It's not something that gets a lot of coverage. We still have incinerators in Greater Manchester. Moving to more recycling and less incineration and less landfill is something that can aid the reduction in our carbon footprint. For instance, in Trafford, you can put a fizzy pop bottle into your plastics bin, but that's got a triangle 5 mark on it, and then you've got a tray that's had meat in it that's got a triangle 5 mark in it that can't go in the plastics bin. So we're still throwing away so much of our plastics because we lack the capacity and the mechanisms to actually recycle more and more of our rubbish. And so that's something that should be done, and it's not going to be done overnight. It will be a 10-year process probably to get us to that mark. But I mean, if you're arguing that you want to be zero carbon by 38, this has to be part of it. But then a lot of the education programs, starting early, getting kids and getting families taught up so they don't just go for the plastic covered product, they go for the self-wrap products. It's all those little things that can be done and woven through skills and jobs and health and all the services we have in Greater Manchester. I mean, one of the shameful things about healthcare is the amount that we actually throw away because it's clinical waste. How is healthcare going to change over the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years to accommodate the climate change, the climate emergency and the need for zero emissions? Because it will have to. And I'm sure there's boffins and scientists that are working on that right now. And we should stand with them and support them and encourage them forward. I'm waiting for someone to interrupt me.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, Simon, on the skills front, and we've got a question here about how do the candidates plan to harness these opportunities that the zero carbon agenda brings? As you say, both from the sort of the manufacturing, the skills, the healthcare agenda. Michael, what are your thoughts on this? And I wonder if I can ask you a second question as well, which is, what do you consider as the most important priority for short-term recovery from the effects of the pandemic? Perhaps the skills question actually feeds into that. That was a question from Dave Trinnigan.
Well, just before I answer that very quickly, someone mentioned social care before, and I just wanted to say that we have a massive gap in the housing markets at the moment for people who are in need of social care, but who are too young to go into care homes. There's very little available for people in their 60s and 70s who perhaps have an illness or can't cope on their own. In terms of skills, this is a massive opportunity. We're probably going to be faced with an unemployment problem. I want to work with schools and colleges to broaden the curriculum so that trades are taught for people who perhaps aren't as interested in academia. I also want to provide opportunities for adults to learn new trades. And of course, we know that there are going to be innovative new trades needed, but I'd also like to encourage traditional trades, stonemasonry, carpentry, metalworking. We know that we have a massive building programme ahead of us, so I'd like to have those skills readily available here in Greater Manchester.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Michael. Andy, what would you do to actually sort of improve the skills gap? And I think specifically in relation to the built environment, got a question here from Kevin. What would you like to see business do better to improve the built environment in Greater Manchester? And from speaking before this event, there's I gather you're looking at a plan for a sort of a retrofitting workforce. Perhaps you can tell the audience a bit about that and how that would play out.
Thanks, so because that answers Dave Trimmingham's question about the most important priority for the recovery. Because maybe Michael, I think, was just touching on this. It's got to be a green recovery, I think, and that's the kind of the way this has got to go. When I came in as mayor, I was quite clear that decarbonisation and digitalisation are going to be the two big drivers of the 21st century economy and wider society. So therefore, to be a leader in 21st century industry, Greater Manchester had to be a leading digital city and a leading green city. So that is my plan, basically. And I called the Greater Manchester Green Summit first year I was in office to change the story and up our ambition around the green agenda. And we set 2038 coming out of that, not as a political target, as a science-led target informed by the University of Manchester. And we're really now moving towards that. And I think this is the way to look at climate coming out of this. Solving the climate crisis will solve the jobs crisis, because that is where the thousands of quality jobs are that can benefit our residents. If we are to hit 2038, we need to retrofit every single property in Greater Manchester. And we have to get new skills to build to new techniques, modern methods of construction, passive house standards. And so we need a bit of a skills revolution here. But it's the obvious place to look coming out of this crisis, isn't it? To speed up, to accelerate our ambitions around a zero carbon Greater Manchester, because there are thousands and thousands of good jobs in a major retrofitting program across the city region. And I don't believe in my lifetime we have been in a position to say to the young people of Greater Manchester or indeed the Northwest that if they train in a particular skill set, they could have a good quality job for life. But that is a realistic possibility with all of this. So what do businesses need to do to change buildings? Well, we all need to get on board with 2038 and the need to retrofit, but also the need to think differently about building. We need partnerships with the FE colleges to get in place the training courses that we're going to need. And lastly, I want us to shine very brightly in the spotlight that will be the COP26 in Glasgow later this year. Because of the thinking that Greater Manchester has done, I think we are in a position of leadership on the green economy. And I think we've really now got to kind of go to Glasgow later this year with a compelling plan that is about doing the right thing by the planet, but in doing so, creating thousands of jobs and turning the green kind of debate a little bit from a burden, oh, it's a burden, we're going to have to do it one day, to say, well, actually, this is the way we give people better homes, better jobs, better transport, a better life, because a green home can be cheaper to run, a green car can be cheaper to run. So it's about really embracing it in every respect. And as somebody said in one of the questions, making sure the kind of climate thread is woven through every single policy now that the Greater Manchester Combined Authority is bringing forward.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I think
in there for a moment.
Sure, yeah, of course you can.
It's just about making it woven in. We all know that we have the Skills and Jobs and the Apprenticeship Fund for Greater Manchester, and I think we could all commit right now to actually saying part of that fund over the next few years will be committed to future green apprenticeships, to actually train up from the bottom all of those new industries and new green industries that are coming. They're going to need all these workers. We can actually get people 16, 17, 18, 19 to 24-year-olds all trained up, ready through business, through new green apprenticeships.
Simon, our housing providers are starting to do that, actually. So they are bringing through a lot of new apprentices. But we've got the adult education budget under our control as well. And we're using that to create green conversion courses or digital conversion courses for older people, already in the workforce who need to change their skills. And we've now started on a public sector retrofitting program, because we recognise that the public sector often needs to pump prime the change. So that is now coming forward, where we're going to convert public sector buildings first. So it's all beginning to happen. I would just make an appeal today to the businesses on this call to really embrace it now and work with us on it, because the more we build out the critical mass, the more we get ahead of the game. I think Greater Manchester will really create a real dividend from being a leader in retrofitting.
Sure. Okay. Thanks both. Just on a different note, but it's related to the sort of post-COVID recovery question that we had earlier. Paulina Olziak, what are the candidates' views on how our city centres could remain attractive in the future to residents and offices when outer city living is becoming more popular, or has become more popular throughout the pandemic? Michael, what do you think about this?
I think city centre living is still very popular, but I think it needs to be integrated, and that's really the crucial point, because we're talking about developments, whether they're in the city centre or out of it. If we have an integrated Greater Manchester, so that these places are easily accessible, so that people have public transport hubs in the heart of those residential developments, and also I'm very much in favour of walkways surrounded by amenities connecting residential areas to town and city centres. Then it makes a Greater Manchester that fits well together, and everywhere becomes desirable in which to live.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Sorry, Andy, you go first.
Oh, okay, Simon.
Okay, we can have both of you, and then we'll probably have to wrap up.
Okay. Well, it's just because there's something quite specific to say in the answer to Paulina's question. There is a city centre transport strategy coming forward, and it will come to the combined authority a week on Friday. So this is a plan developed by Salford City Council, Manchester City Council and TfGM. And it is all about making the city centre more livable, with the cycling and walking provision and the pedestrian space that Michael was just talking about. Of course, the City Council have plans for the first public park in 100 years in the city centre at the Mayfield development, and that's been made possible through some of the brownfield cleanup funding that we've brought in. So there is actually a lot going on, Paulina, on that. I think it is also about us working with industry, though, because office usage is clearly going to change, and we need to work with you to support you in some of that change, perhaps converting some of our office space to more co-working space, and have been ready to embrace some of those opportunities. So I think this is actually, because obviously this has been a moment to step off the sort of the treadmill, if you like, and rethink the city centre. And I think the city centre is going to become very different actually coming out of this, but will be a highly attractive place to live, as will Stockport Town Centre when the Mayoral Development Corporation has completed its work. So I'm not pessimistic about it, actually. I think with a reformed transport system that is zero emission at street level, very different buses, not the queues of buses on Oxford Road anymore, but much a cleaner, greener, different offer in public transport. I think the quality of life in the city centre is going to kind of take a significant jump up, and also when you think about the clean air reforms that we're bringing through as well. So lots there, but I think it's exciting. And the just last thing I would say is it's why I prioritise. People looked at me as though I was mad when I became mayor, when I said I was going to make cycling and walking our top priority for transport infrastructure spending when I had the money from the government. But, I'm absolutely certain that was the right thing to do now, because it's bringing benefits to all 10 boroughs, and it's creating more livable communities, safer communities. So, this change is really happening. And I think the more we partner with industry to spread the benefits of this kind of, different way of living and moving around the city region is going to be the way forward for us in the years ahead. But thank you, Simon, for
Thanks.
jumping in.
I'll
Thanks,
add.
yeah, Simon, we'll have to wrap up. So
sorry.
just like, give it 30 seconds if you can
I know,
make a point in that.
on the question, I think I've got friends that live in apartments in the city centre, and I think one of the things that's come out of the pandemic is people that live in smaller apartments and smaller places have really noticed their lack of space during this pandemic, so wanting to move either bigger or out. So that is a challenge, and I think building in the future, we should be building 3-bedroom apartments in the city centre, places for families to live and places for people to have a bit more space. And it may cost a little bit more and it may take a little bit longer, but it will create more stable communities that stay in town and city centres in the future. So yeah,
and it also it sounds like from what you're both saying, both in the city and kind of in the outskirts, this question about how to make sort of, whether it's green belt or park spaces, as Andy said, with the Mayfield Park. That's going to be all part of it, isn't it? So look, we've kind of done a whistle-stop tour around all of the kind of key policy areas that you guys are working on at the moment. So I'm sorry we haven't got through everybody's questions, but I noticed that a few of them kind of have linked to what we've discussed already. So I hope you feel like at least your sort of concerns or queries have been touched upon. So we'll have to wrap up now. So thanks so much to all of you three for joining. Please do stay on for the networking break, and we'll be back for our Liverpool City Region session at 3:25. So a quick break now. Let's switch to networking mode. Thank you and see you all shortly. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us again. Our next session will be a chance to question the Liverpool City Region Metro Mayor candidates. I'd like to welcome to the stage Steve Rotherham, Labour candidate and the current Metro Mayor for the City Region, Jade Marsden from the Conservatives, and Gary Cargill from the Green Party. If you could all turn on your cameras and mics if you haven't already. Thanks to you all for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
No problem.
Cool. Okay, we'll kick off. So as in the first session, a quick warm-up question from me. Could each candidate please give a brief introduction of who they are personally and professionally, and why they're standing for election as mayor? And please do keep it 2 to 3 minutes so we don't use up valuable debating time. Steve, do you want to start?
Yeah, just before I start, can I just say that we would have been joined by a Liberal Democrat, but unfortunately he's had a really serious illness. And so I'm sure on behalf of all the candidates, we'd like to send him all our very best for a speedy recovery.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks. My name's Steve Rotherham, and as the incumbent, if you like, as the Metro Mayor, my #1 priority has always been and will always continue to be to stand up for everybody in every part of our great city region. And throughout the pandemic, I've done this. I've taken on Boris Johnson and the government to win more funding and support for our councils, to improve testing and vaccination hubs, get self-isolation payments for those who were told to quarantine, and to secure a proper furlough scheme for workers. We've also invested more than £40 million to specifically keep the local economy afloat and put together exciting plans to help the city region recover quickly. And on the 6th of May, people will have the opportunity to elect a Metro Mayor with a strong record of standing up for this area and with a record of winning funding from central government, because we need that to start to rebuild from coronavirus. And since being elected in 2017, I'm proud to have delivered on that manifesto. I've built an organisation from scratch. I've secured more than £200 million in extra funding for transport skills, tackling homelessness and lots of other things. We've supported and delivered 9,000 new jobs, 5,500 apprenticeships, 15,000 new homes. And we've also launched the Mersey Tidal Power Project, one of the largest renewable energy projects in the whole country. But as well as securing money from government, what you do with it is just as important. So if I'm re-elected, I'll immediately start to deliver a £150 million COVID recovery package to develop our ecosystem, doubling the number of green jobs in our city region, and working to build a London-style integrated transport system that we will control. I'll always stand up for the people in our area, and I'll make sure that the Liverpool City region is a place where no one is left behind.
Great, thanks, Steve. That was definitely within the time brief, so thanks for that. Jade, would you like to go next?
Good afternoon, I'm Jade Marston. Thank you, Place, for organising this event, and to attendees for actually taking the time to listen to myself and the other candidates. I've been campaigning in this region for most of my adult life. I'm so proud of the assets we have in our region, but have always felt people have been let down and prevented from reaching their true potential. When I see representatives from our region, we often see a negative, downtrodden attitude when the opposite is true. We're open to new ideas in our region. Innovation, we have can-do attitudes. So let's sell this to investors and pull our enthusiasm around the country and around the world. So how would I do this as mayor? I actually think it's pretty simple. Let people make their own decisions. Give them the power to influence their communities. And most importantly, invest in people. If people have control and power, they are happier. When people are happier, they're more productive. And when people are more productive, investment will follow. So if you want to sell the region as a place where people will want to live, work and raise families, vote for me. Let's move forward as one with energy and enthusiasm to make our region a competitor around the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Jade. Gary?
Okay, I'm Gary Cargill, and I'm the Green Party candidate for the Liverpool City Region Metro Mayor elections in May. I was born in Liverpool. I was brought up in the city region, educated in our schools, socialised as a kid in our community centres and youth groups. It's an incredibly special part of our world, and it continues to play an incredibly special part in my life. It is my home. And what a very special word that is, home. I'm sure a great deal to everyone in this virtual room, although I know it means different things to different people. If the truth be told, I never really had any intention of becoming a politician in any way, shape or form. I've never had any intention to be that person who pushes through laws and legislation that govern how people live. But in 2018, something incredibly magical happened to me, a life-changing event. I became a father for the first time. I've become a dad. And with that, I began to creatively imagine what the world might look like for my son, Joe, when he's my age, what the world might look like for Joe's children. And it's a very bleak picture indeed. We are just 20 years into this century, and we have had 19 of the hottest years on record. I'm sure we've all seen Sir David Attenborough's heartfelt pleas to the UN, urging the world to get their carbon footprints and budgets in order now. Indeed, he believes that now we are at a tipping point from which there may be no return. They're really honest. And like him, I too believe that the next 10 years are very possibly the most important in the history of humankind. And as a city region, we stand together upon a very dangerous precipice. The Liverpool City region has a carbon budget that is aligned to the Paris Agreement, and that gives us 46 million tonnes of carbon to expend by 2100. That's the rest of the century. But we are going to bust that budget in just 7 years' time if we don't act now. All 6 boroughs that make up the Liverpool City region have declared a climate emergency, and that gives us license to act fast. I want to transition our Liverpool City region to net zero carbon status by 2030. Not 2040 or some other hopeless point in the future, but 2030. And you, my friends, will have a very big part to play. So I'm looking forward to your questions, to hearing your ideas, to listening to your concerns, because I'm going to need you, your inventiveness, your expertise, your cooperation, and your passion to help me create a truly magnificent home for our communities, for our children, and for our future generations to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks all three of you. I think that hopefully, particularly for the less well-known candidates, I think that hopefully gives our audience lets them know a bit about you, and will help to frame the questions. Steve, I've just got a quick question for you, just as being the sort of holding the post at the moment. It's quite a general question, but what's your comments on sort of what is the value of having both a city region mayor and a city mayor, if you know what I mean? Are they both needed, and what extra powers would you like from Whitehall to be able to do the job better?
Whether they're needed or not is dependent on what the decision of Liverpool City Council will be, and not what is in the interest of myself or other individuals. And they will take that decision in due course. There's a mayoral election alongside the Metro mayoral election, alongside the local council elections, alongside the Police and Crime Commissioner elections. And we sometimes wonder why people are either switched off or that they don't really understand fully the democratic processes, because each of those different things have different voting ways in which we'll determine the winner. In regard to the Liverpool City region and the benefits of having devolution, I worked in Westminster. I was the MP for Liverpool Walton, and I heard some conversations once through one of the doors that was ajar in what they call the corridors of power. And it was about Liverpool, so it just cocked my ear around the door to listen to it. And it was very, very critical of Liverpool. And these people had a different perspective of what I understood about the area that I'm from. And so I listened to it, and it was actually, I'm not going to mention the person, but it was a Whitehall Mandarin. And I thought, very different perspective. So when I stood as the Metro Mayor, the thing that I wanted to do was to change the perspective, because the more devolution that we can get for our area, the more we can make decisions for ourselves, the less likely it is that somebody like a Whitehall Mandarin is going to be making the wrong decisions for us. So devolution is hugely important to us. And hopefully the foundations that have been laid in the last 3.5 years will go on to ensure that we build a fantastic city region for everybody.
Sure. Okay, Steve. And any sort of additional power that you'd like? Is it funding? Is it?
Where do you want to start? Some of the departmental funding would do us. So DWP got huge budgets, and we're doing something called Household into Work, trying to get long-term unemployed people back into the world of work, but not by sanctions, by wraparound support. The stuff around skills, the apprenticeship levy funding, which is lying in the pot, 2 billion quid of it, we could use that to skill young people and to upskill people in the workforce because of the changes that are going to come in a post-pandemic world. There's stuff around transport that I'd love to get hold of, the green economy and what will happen with a Green New Deal and what we're doing with Mersey Tidal Power and all the other stuff. I could go on and on. I'd rather any funding come locally than national government have it, but education also has to be a big pot for us.
Sure. Okay, thanks, Steve. Gary, quick one for you. Do you think the mayoral model has been a success to date? And how would you change it should you come into power? And then we'll come to you, Jade, and drill down into your policies a bit before you have to leave.
Well, I mean, it's a brilliant question. I think firstly, the true litmus test for the effectiveness of the Metro Mayor job is to ask the people what they think and what they understand from its position and its devolved powers. And on my little journey to this position, where I'm standing before you now in this virtual room, I've obviously, asked people in my community, I've asked my friends, my family, people in other boroughs, people that I love within the city region, and the majority don't actually know what the Metro Mayor does. And here's the thing, the majority don't even know who the Metro Mayor is. They don't know Steve Rotherham, and the majority of the people that I spoke to, well, our city region Metro Mayor was a guy called Andy Burnham. Now, in all seriousness, there's clearly an issue with visibility, and I would say that needs to change. And as your Metro Mayor, I would make a commitment to be community present everywhere. It's a promise. One of the issues that I think we have in our city region right now is a Labour mayor that's surrounded by a team of Labour leaders from Labour-dominated borough councils, and I would say ongoing control wielded by a single party from which everyone else is excluded is not good on many scores. So one of the improvements that I would like to look at would be opening up the activities of the city region mayoral role so that they are made more transparent, open to public and political scrutiny. And this may be by pushing hard to adopt an elected assembly, which would be like a similar version to the London Assembly, elected using a proportional voting system in exactly the same way that the London mayor is. And I would say that this would lead to more decision making and the inclusion of a more diverse and representative cross-section of our regional community being represented at the decision making table.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Gary. Okay, just before we go to Jade, Steve, do you want to comment at all on Gary's point about visibility of the Metro Mayor?
I think Gary is a councillor, and the people that I've spoken to, who he's been involved in politics in the Green Party, don't know who Gary Cargill is neither. Anyway, so it's the oldest trick in the book, isn't it, to say that nobody knows who somebody is. The proof of the pudding will be in the decision of the electorate, and we'll see who comes out on the top there. What I would say is, it appears that you don't understand that Liverpool city region didn't exist before, whereas Manchester have had AGMA for 40 years, and they've always worked collaboratively. We're only 3 and a bit years into this. Watch what happens in the next 3.5 years.
Great, thanks, Steve. Okay, quick one from you,
Sorry,
Gary, and then we'll move on to Jade.
Yeah, no, I'm not a councillor. I've never stood for council, never stood for political office before. So, so if people don't, well, my record has been like a dad, you know, and like a a person who lives and breathes in the living world.
That's 2 to 3 kids.
Record. So.
Okay, let's also the audience. Let's get those Q&As going, shall we? I was looking a bit empty over there. Jade, let's hear a bit about your policies then, shall we? So you're pledging to create a happier, healthier region. That's what you said, with better housing, transport, healthcare. So what can you sort of tell us about, are there any sort of 3 key actions that you'll take to go about that?
Well, like Steve said, I think it's important we try and get more control over education and health in the region. There's a lot of misinterpretation, especially in Westminster, as again, Steve's already said, of what the North actually needs. And I find it a tragedy that no matter how much we invest in our region, our kids will always be less able to achieve the same as others from other parts of the country. So one of the things I think we need to address is actually identifying what the reason is. We need to help our kids to not only manage their expectations in life, but actually tell them that anything they want to do is possible. Because they're from the Northwest, it doesn't make them less of a person than anybody else. We've got issues around BAME people not achieving as much as other people. We really have to address this inequality with other regions in the country.
Okay, thanks, Jade. I was going to ask you a question about housing, actually, and we've just seen that the first question we've had here is about it. It's a big issue in Merseyside. All the candidates have mentioned better housing, but how are they going to achieve that when planning is so dependent on local authorities? I'd like to put that to you, Jade, but also sort of wrap it into my own question, which is really, what's your stance on sort of affordable and social housing? We've seen recently quite a big shake-up happening within Liverpool City Council, within that bit, to bring delivery of council housing back into their control. What do you make of that, and what would be your own priorities?
First and foremost, I think that we need to be building the right houses in the right places. As I've said all along, my core belief is to make sure that people are actually addressed on what they want. The accessibility. Is there any point in a city council deciding that housing should be built over there when actually people want them over here? We need to start understanding what people's desires are and how we can stop the movement of people in social housing, because ultimately people will stay in housing for a couple of months and then something more appropriate will come along. How can we make sure that housing is appropriate from the start so that people can stay there, build their families there, and actually start developing a proper community? Because one of the things I've found talking to people and, you know, looking into this is the breakdown in society is damaging our community and our areas. So let's make sure that we build the housing that people want, where they want it and where they want to stay.
Okay, thanks, Jade. And how do you see the council's sort of involvement in that? Do you see it sort of continuing to sort of evolve? How would you support that as mayor? Or change
I do think the housing should be under the council's remit. They know best. But as you know, Gary said, there's a kind of dependency on one party. We do need scrutiny panels involved in this. To again make sure that they're getting put in the right place and the right people are being helped.
Okay, thanks, Jade. Deborah McConnell in our audience, she says, Jade, you're not telling us exactly what you would do to achieve your goals. What specifically in concrete terms would you do? You're very general and every candidate would probably agree with you. That's what she's saying. Can you drill down a bit? So to take those three priorities those three kind of overarching goals that you described earlier, and maybe sort of 2 or 3 action points, sort of key policy changes that you'd make.
So the first point about housing is that before any plans are put towards communities, whether they want them or not, and whether they get the okay from councils, we need to engage with the existing community. We need to put surveys out. We need to get them involved in the actual development process along the way. We need to make sure that these houses are future-proof. We need to make sure that before any permissions are given for housing, that they will be sustainable for the future. Electric cars, they're going to need charge points. Why are we building homes that don't have electric charge points for these cars? And in terms of the education side of things, I would like to make sure that we push for a budget to actually make sure that kids are getting the correct developmental support in terms of their health. There's studies to say how few children in the Northwest have actual dentists, which I find quite shocking. We actually need a team of people to go in there, make sure that these kids are healthy from the start. We need to push for a budget for that from Westminster. Then we can start addressing other things like reading ability and, making sure that they can compete with their peers around the country.
Okay, thanks, Jade. What about sort of business and how it can be sort of galvanised to improve the built environment in Merseyside? Which areas and sectors would you like to see investors focus their ambitions to do that? Investors and developers, that is.
Is that me?
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, I think it's got to be a team effort. I don't think that anybody can come in and say, this is what we're going to do. We need to actually be open-minded and allow, input from all the sectors and piece them together with leadership. Okay.
And actually, at this point, I wonder if either Gary or Steve would like to come in and pick up on any of Jade's specific policy points that she's just talked about. Steve?
Yeah, I think Jade needs to understand that there's something called SHELMA, and they are targets that government set local authorities that they have to develop so many housing units per year. And what we would obviously prefer is for us to decide on that from what is the need for a local area. And so we're working with governments, and there was a white paper out recently, which people will know who are on this call, that we submitted our input into. And the needs for council housing is overwhelming in the Liverpool City region. Never mind just about social housing. We need to go back to council housing, but there is the HRA budgets that still need to be sorted out. In Liverpool in 2017, I suggested that we should look to see whether we could get council housing in Liverpool, because that was where the biggest propensity was required. It's the same everywhere else, but we've got a green platform to develop. We've got some funding that we've got to remediate formerly used land instead of develop, so brownfield first instead of developing on our green belt. They're the sort of things that you can only get by winning concessions from national government, and that's what we've had to do. We've been working with national government for 3.5 years so that we can do some of those things, but we have very limited powers and often one arm tied behind our back, but we're doing what we can because of the imposition of national targets.
Jade, do you want to respond to that at all?
No, I completely, I agree. And that's why I think we need to be pushing for more powers when it comes to housing and development. I agree with Steve. And I know, Steve has actually done a pretty good job on this. Like, you can't knock him. So, I agree with that.
What do you think about this this question from Tom Morrison at the top of our Q&A panel? Can the candidates tell me where are the right places for housing in Merseyside? Lots of investors and developers would like to know so that they can work with the combined and local authorities. What's your view on this, Jade? And perhaps related to that, what's your view about the sort of brownfield versus greenfield debate? Where do you sit there?
So on the brownfield greenfield debate, I think we need to be pushing for a redefine a moment of this, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about green belt, green spaces, what you can build there, and it's the public aren't quite sure what it means. So you'll get people very upset when houses are being built on green belt, for example, and it's not necessarily somewhere where housing shouldn't be built. Personally, I think we need to be building houses close to the city, as close as possible, with the infrastructure there to use cycle lanes and things like that, so that it's not a hardship to get anywhere and that we don't have to be jumping into cars all the time. But again, that's down to the public. Again, it comes down to power. We need to be speaking to people. Where do you want to live? Where do you want to build these houses?
Okay, thanks, Jade. I want to ask Gary his view about this in a sec, but we've had another question submitted earlier from a member of the audience, Deborah McConnell, who's from CPRE, the Countryside charity. Liverpool Council wants a new dual carriageway to facilitate container movement by HGVs from Liverpool Superport to the motorway network. This involves destruction of Rimrose Valley, Sefton's Green, Long. What consideration has been given to a multimodal transport solution instead to meet the council's declared climate crisis ambitions? And I wonder if perhaps Steve might like to answer that, because he's probably closest to that. But then also whether the other two candidates could sort of say how they might tackle that kind of issue.
Yeah, no problem, Sarah. I just broke up the very first bit. Could you just repeat the first few words you said? Who Sure.
Yeah, of the whole question.
Yeah.
Liverpool Council wants to build a new dual carriageway.
Okay, I thought you said that. Yeah, no, I thought you said that. Liverpool Council have got no jurisdiction over Sefton Council, so I'm afraid that the question is predicated on a falsehood. Highways England want to build a dual carriageway through a country park called Rimrose Valley, and locals there are rightly up in arms. They want to protect their green space. It's not to alleviate the problems just for the port. Only 13%, I think, of the traffic is port traffic. It's Dunningsbridge Road. If anyone knows that corridor, that's the area I'm from. I'm from the north of Liverpool. Go from Switch Island and it's absolutely chocker. So it is about the issue of what we do to alleviate transport. And that's why I want that London-style integrated transport system, to give people a quality alternative to getting out of the car. And you can do it. I had a car up until about 2 years ago and dumped it and just got rid of it. And I get the train into work, even as the Metro Mayor. And I've got a scooter for other things that, I can nip around. You can find alternative solutions, but the more we can make it a quality alternative, such as low emission vehicles, hydrogen buses, which we're bringing in at the end of this year, the more I think we'll attract people over. and then you won't need more and more roads, because the race to build more roads is never the solution.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Jade, do you want to sort of address that point before you have to shoot off?
Well, as Steve said, it's about finding an alternative way of doing things. You know, ultimately, the port traffic is going to become an issue, especially as the port gets busier. And we really need to be looking into what kind of vehicles are used. Do we go down the route of rewarding companies that are using, carbon neutral vehicles and things like that? Do we put a tariff on people using so-called dirty vehicles? I think we need to go down that route as well.
Okay, thanks, Jade. Gary, I'd love to hear your view on all of this. It all feeds into what your sort of priority is about the sort of climate emergency, in terms of how do you actually sort of reconcile all of these conflicting points. The need to provide decent infrastructure, the need to provide homes close to that infrastructure, but also sort of protecting greenbelt if that's what the local people want. So how would you address that if you were to be elected?
Well, I mean, that's exactly right, Sarah. I think our mantra on this, certainly mine, is not green belt, and we are facing a climate and ecological emergency, as we've talked about. And the very last thing that we should be doing is building on our spaces, be they official green belt or not, and I think one of the most important lessons that we've learned during the COVID pandemic is just how important our green spaces are to our mental and physical well-being. So I would, as the City Region Metro Mayor, I would aim to make local communities part of the planning process, and to empower them in identifying, eyesores and rundown brownfield sites for redevelopments, rather than destroying and building on our valuable green spaces. I think local people know the local problems, and they often have solutions to those problems if we only listen to them. So we can improve local communities and protect vital green spaces at the same time. And we would do this with many local initiatives. We could make use of local small and medium-sized businesses to undertake the work and create and sustain local jobs, rather than big out-of-town builders arriving, completing the work, and then moving on to the next greenfield site in the town or city. In terms of our green spaces, well, the UK does remain, despite all the uncertainty and all the challenges that we face, we remain one of the wealthiest nations on the planet, and it is an affront to decency that anyone should live in damp, cold, or substandard housing. And rather than all too often focusing on building new executive home developments in the very green spaces that COVID-19 has shown to be so vital to our physical and mental well-being, we Greens believe that we should be revitalising our communities, upgrading existing homes and empty buildings in our towns and cities first. Buildings that are already close to services such as schools, shops, public transport links, rather than being and irreplaceable green spaces where community facilities don't exist, and private cars are the only viable means of transport. So our plans for regeneration of our towns and cities will involve working with small businesses, community-owned enterprises, and larger construction companies as appropriate to the work. And in this way, we would provide homes upgraded or newly built to the latest energy efficiency standards, remove areas of well-known neglect, revitalise neighbourhoods to create a new modern that everyone can be proud to call home. And that includes protecting our vital green community spaces like Rimrose Valley Park.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks. Jade, do you need to shoot off now?
Yeah, I'm going to have to go now.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thanks for joining.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you. Steve, I wonder what you make of Gary's target, to transition the whole of the Liverpool City region to net zero carbon status by 2030, 10 years earlier than the current 2040 target set. How realistic is this from your kind of personal experience so far?
I think it's a fantastic aspiration, but that's all it really is. It's just not doable in that time without inflicting huge economic damage on the whole area. And we're only able to get to 2040. And by the way, this is not finger in the air. I'd love to see where Gary's calculations and modelling is to enable anywhere to do what he wants to do. We've been working with universities and looking at whether we can squeeze more out of 2040, because I'd like it to be tomorrow. I'm the same as Gary. I'm a father. This is about the next generation for me, you know, ensuring, as he said, that we have got those green lungs of parks and space for people. That's why our spatial development strategy is around people and place, because that's important. We've got a brownfield register, the first in the country to do that outside of London. You know, that brownfield first approach that I spoke to you about, our funding is to encourage the development on brownfield first. There's lots and lots of things you can do, but the tidal project will decarbonise along with something called Glass Futures, which many people won't have heard of, but Glass Futures is hugely important to us. It's about energy intensive industries using hydrogen as an alternative for fossil fuels. And that can take millions of tons of carbon out of the atmosphere in the Liverpool City region every single year. And if we get it right, we can roll it out across the whole country, because as we know, the climate emergency is about the whole planet. You can't just tidy up the air quality in one particular area. So we are looking at what we can do right the way across the piece. But I think it's wrong to kid people that you can just pluck a figure out the air. As I say, if Gary provides me with the modelling and we can get somebody from the universities who can look through that modelling and they can verify it as being accurate, then I'll adopt Gary's approach. But I don't think you can do it without, as I say, absolutely destroying the fundamental base of the economy in the Liverpool City region.
Gary, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think we have to look at where we are now, and the situation is simply this, okay? A climate emergency has been declared a crisis, all right? Who declares a climate emergency a crisis and then says they'll deal with it in 20 years' time, 2040? For me, 2040 is simply kicking the can down the road, and it's this simple, okay? There will be changes that need to be made, yes, to how we live, to how our housing, to, you know, we want to retrofit all of our homes to passive house standards. We need to look at how we energize the city in terms of new, clean, green, renewable energy. And yes, you know, hydrogen buses. But the fact remains that a crisis has been declared. And we've seen from the current health crisis, the pandemic, that the current government responded too late and they paid the price for it. Okay, the situation just got worse and worse. The climate emergency isn't going to go away by kicking the can down the road 20 years. So what happened? Well, the government and governments around the world, they responded to the crisis by finding the funds to respond to that crisis. And by that, I mean, in the first lockdown, homing the homeless, resourcing the NHS, underwriting the incomes of millions of people, writing off billions of pounds to public debt. If we're taking the word crisis seriously, then we have to act seriously and we have to respond seriously as well. And so from my perspective, it is manageable, it is workable. And yes, we can sit down and we can talk about the figures and we can lay out a clear pathway. And that would be a great thing. I would love to be part of that. But it's like this, we have to do it. We don't have any other choice. And if the governments have got a massive problem with anything that we want to propose and that we want to do, well, you know, they need to start practicing holding their breath while they're counting the money, because that's what they're going to be doing if you leave it to 2040. It's going to get worse. It's going to get more expensive.
Gary, because honestly, I'm genuinely, I'm interested in this. So how many houses do you think across the city region need to be retrofitted, Gary? No, how many?
Okay,
Quantify
so we would need to retrofit all of our houses to, yeah, okay, so we'll get there. To achieve this goal in 2030, we would need to retrofit 47,000 135 homes would need to be insulated every year within the Liverpool City region to ensure that all homes are properly insulated by 2030. And in addition to this, we need to be transitioning away from gas-fired boilers in our homes.
I wouldn't scratch the surface.
Systems.
It's 700,000
Okay.
homes. So for us to get to where we need to get to, right, how much per home do you think that would take if there's 700,000 homes, and where would that funding come from?
You see, Steve, like, we haven't just plucked the figures out of the air. We're working with the local government analysis
In the city region,
set up by Friends of the Earth.
in the
That's
city
where the
region,
figures
not
come
nationally.
from. It's not just something that's been pulled from nowhere. So within the city region, the local government analysis suggests to achieve the goal by 2030 of retrofitting all of our homes to passive house standards, we would need to insulate 47,535 homes insulated every year within the Liverpool City region to ensure that.
Yeah, in over 9 years. Over 9 years. So that's only half the housing that you'd need. So it's 700,000 homes that we would need to have retrofitted. So if we're going to do that, how much would 700,000 homes cost, and where does the money come from? By the way, I want you to give me the answers, because if you want it to happen and I want it to happen, then if you've got the answers there, if you know where the money's coming from, great, let's go and get it.
Yeah, well, I don't have the figures in front of me,
Gary,
but we can sit down and we can talk about it.
Maybe you can set out a bit more about the funding strategy, and specifically how you would aim to get the private sector involved in funding some of this as well. You know, how would you do that?
Well, I mean, the aim is to work, because we can't do it alone. The aim is to work in consultation with the private sector, with trade unions, and with community enterprises as well. That would be the plan. We also, what we propose to do in terms of retrofits, we plan a VAT cut for retrofit. Okay, that the government has the ability, we believe, to decide now whether it wants to benefit all of our society, or if it wants to continue rising big business at the expense of everyone else. So what we're doing is we're calling on the government to cut VAT for refurbishment and for retrofitting works to lower energy consumption and ensure that everyone has access to a warm home. So we will be pushing hard with my party and the two central governments to remove VAT for refurbishment projects if they substantially reduce carbon emissions. So that's what we would do. But in conjunction with that, we would also impose a 20% VAT for new build schemes. But that would be reduced to 5% if the build meets minimum passive house standards.
And Gary, sort of in terms of incentivising the build to passive house standards, what would you be sort of saying to developers? What would be your case to private developers? How would you sort of how would you pitch that to them and sort of, I guess, reassure them that would work for them in terms of the scheme's viability?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say during a climate and ecological crisis, we need to incentivize the most effective ways and to provide everyone with a warm, secure home. Okay, so the government has the ability to decide now whether it wants to benefit all of our society or whether it wants to continue prioritizing big business at the expense of everyone else. So that cut in VAT down to 5% is a massive incentive just to begin with. And also we will be levying for more financial powers to be able to, you know, incentivize schemes, you know, apprenticeships and kind of further job training opportunities so that we can skill our workforce within our own.
Just a sort of final question on the climate change point, and then we'll move on to talk about sort of skills and transport and a few more things. Steve, this question from Matthew Hard: can brownfield sites legitimately be developed while still providing affordable housing and addressing climate change? Greenfield sites are far more likely to be able to deliver these benefits, he says. How would you respond to that?
This is the reality, isn't it? This is what happens out there. You know, any developer would rather go on a virgin field, green space without the uncertainties of what's happened previously on that site under the ground, because that's where the costs are. And I do agree with Gary, that we should be looking at a VAT reduction for retrofit. We've been calling for that for 10 years, and the government seem reluctant to do that. So again, it's a hope, isn't it, rather than the reality of what we'll have to do on a daily basis. But if Gary puts 20% on homes, it makes it less commercially viable to develop those sorts of schemes. And people will continue then to look for greenfield, where you, as I say, it's cheaper to build on that than it is on brownfield. So we've got a brownfield register. We were the first in the country, as I say. And on that brownfield register, we've now got a pot of money from central government to remediate land so that it then becomes commercially viable for a developer to come in and to build on that and to get a return on their investment. Now, I think we need to go back a stage. I was talking about HRA accounts, what needs to happen with central government for our councils to be able to compete, if you like, with that, in as much as there also needs to be a social dimension to this. And council housing provide the ideal alternative for those people who can't afford to buy, and certainly for those people who would find the imposition of an additional 20% on top of that probably prohibitive for them getting on the housing ladder. So that's what we're doing. We're looking at how we can practically work with developers, but to get more out of the schemes for our local economy.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Gary.
Just to clarify the 20% VAT thing, it's we'd be asking for the 20% charge on new builds, but that would be reduced to 5% if they meet the correct energy standards that we're looking for. So passive house standards or like equivalent energy, like efficient.
Okay. Thanks, Gary.
Version of passive house.
I'm just wondering about another question from the audience, which is kind of the same, a different side of the same coin that we've been talking about. Saying lots of talk around green and brownfield spaces, no discussion regarding mixed use or commercial to resi developments to better utilise existing urban spaces. Any plans to promote and I guess sort of identify and promote such schemes? Gary, what's your approach to that?
Yeah, well, I think we do need to look at we do need to rejuvenate our towns and city. There's so much that needs our town centres and our city. They're not the commercial hubs that they once were, and so I think they can be used as as kind of new multi-purpose sites, more community focused and organised, and within that residential housing. It's really important that we do that, and I agree with Jade before, and we need to start building homes closer to our towns and cities, and where people can walk into town, where they can make active use of active transport routes.
Okay.
So
and sort of to press further on that, particularly in the sort of wake of the pandemic, a lot of town centres are empty shops and empty units. Do you have any sort of creative approaches to sort of bringing those buildings back into use, or perhaps rejuvenating high streets, incentives in any form to sort of retailers to come in, independent businesses, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, like we talked before, didn't we, about making people part of the planning process because they understand what the eyesores are. They know their towns and city centres best. So the plan would be to work with local community initiatives, as well as local architects and businesses to try and transition the entire city region, not only to net zero carbon status, but to a vibrant community hub. All our towns need to be vibrant community hubs again. Kind of lost touch of what that is and what it can be. If you walk through some close to me, Widnes, for example, a lot of the shops there, we've got like pound shops and we've got like betting shops and things, but there are spaces that can be redeveloped. So there could be housing right there in the centre of it, and we can green up the area and create a more multi-purpose
Okay, thanks,
town
Gary.
centre.
Steve, what would be your approach to that? Because you've talked about this 150 million, I think it is, this recovery fund that you've just launched in the last week or so. How exactly are you going to sort of try and do things differently, I guess, in the wake of the pandemic, to really try and kind of inject that sort of life and rejuvenation and sort of economic growth back into so many town centres across Merseyside?
This thing is it's a drop in the ocean, isn't it? The £150 million. We actually had a big ask in the £1.4 billion economic recovery plan that we put to government that was still waiting for them to respond to. But they are telling us that it's the most ambitious plan in the whole country. And as part of that, it is around retrofitting and all the stuff, because I think people have quite rightly identified that it's not just the physical doing of something, but the jobs and the skills and the apprenticeships and then the ecosystem that benefits from that. But we've already identified this as a big issue for ourselves. In fact, we've appointed a design champion, and our design champion is an expat Scouser who went to London, did very well for himself, who's a Sterling Prize-winning architect called Paul Monaghan. Many people listening to this will know who Paul is. And Paul wants to give something back to the area that he loves. He's from the area, and he's not being paid huge sums of money. It's something that he wants to do for us. And so Paul is looking at place and how you develop things with those transport links, with active travellers being part of it, not an afterthought, about trying to clean up the area, about trying to ensure that everybody in the vicinity also benefits. So we are already well on the way to pulling all that together with our spatial development strategy. As I say, we're way ahead. What I want to do is to encourage developers, though, through our funding packages, and that is for a whole host of things, such as the Fair Employment Charter that we've got. So that is the way in which a developer would use their workforce and treat them right, not use 0 hours contracts, pay an appropriate day's wage for a day's work. So we're trying to look at it not just in those silos, because that's part of the problem that's happened with housing previously. The compartmentalisation hasn't worked because it does have to link with everything else. But if you're born into a good home, that start in life, it's been demonstrated, gives you the opportunity for social mobility. If you're born in a really poor house in a poorer area, then the detriments to your health and to your educational standards and everything else last you for a lifetime too. So we want to have good housing for everybody in the Liverpool City region.
And is this related to your young person's guarantee as well, Steve? I gather you're tweaking that in the wake of COVID, aren't you?
Yeah, it's funny. Gary says that nobody knows who I am. I think the Prime Minister used my name 13 times just a few months ago when we were trying to tackle COVID in our area. So the Prime Minister knows it, Gary. I'm not sure he knows yours. Or anybody else. He doesn't know mine now, by the way. It was just to throw it in at the time to cause a bit of political problems. But one of the things that I spoke to him about, Johnson, was around the young person's guarantee. And the young person's guarantee was to do exactly what I think we need to do, to give hope to that younger generation that if they apply themselves in school, if they get the qualifications that they required, then there's a transition period for them to get a foot on the career ladder. But those who don't, to give them a second chance. And I'd say that most people who are watching this will have had a second chance of somebody in their lifetime. I certainly have. I've had a second chance. And we want to provide that as well. And the young person's guarantee is, if you're unfortunate and you've come out of work or you've left school and you can't find a job, we'll give you the chance for training, for an apprenticeship, or for employment, working with our employer base. And the way in which we can lever some of those job opportunities is using the investment from the combined authority for scrupulous employers. So if you want to play ball with us, you can get some of the funding from us. But also we work with our third sector, the volunteer community sector, of which we've done brilliant things over the last 12 months. We set up LCR Cares, and we got £2.5 million that we've distributed right the way down to the most vulnerable in our society. And so we've got a massive network that we can use now, and we want to start to see the way in which we can affect change across the whole of the Liverpool City region.
Thanks, Steve. Gary, I'd be interested to hear what your sort of policies would be with respect to skills and social mobility. And we've had a question from the audience, Chris Brown, a universal basic income. What do you think about that, and how would that be feasible? How would it be funded? Oh, Gary, you're muted still. Still muted. Just down at the bottom of the screen, underneath all of our tiles. Oh yeah, I think it's still muted. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Are
you sure?
Thumbs up.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So yeah, I mean, I love the scheme Steve was talking about, by the way. I think it's absolutely fantastic. In terms of UBI, well, I did sign the mayoral pledge as an advocate of UBI, and I think one of the reasons for that I can avoid what's going on the ladder, all of the issues that we face as a community and as hi, can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All of the issues that we face in our communities, they are interconnected, they are intertwined, and we're all affected by them. And we need to realize that when others suffer and struggle, we all do. So I would say the reason why I support UBI, regardless of your independence in your life, no matter how independent you are dependent on others. And the whole thing about UBI is, regardless of your means in life, will be impacted by economic inequality, and regardless of your position, you will be impacted by human potential realized or being unrealized. So it rebalances the system for those who are most in need. It's redistributing wealth more fairly and significantly, and the hope is that it cuts poverty, particularly child poverty, across the city. So the plan, or our plan, will be to assess how a bureaucracy-free universal payment goes to support whether they're in paid work or they're not, and it would reduce the stigma of benefits. So there's lots there to support in terms of where I stand in my own kind of social consciousness. And we need to explore how reducing constant stress and uncertainty affects physical, how it changes behaviours and benefits our community, no matter what the postcode. Is that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Steve, do you have anything to add there?
I've been calling for it for some time. I think the argument has been won now, really, hasn't it? That we need to give people a basic, income. Not just having them relying on a flawed system of universal credit, which, by the way, sanctions people unnecessarily, as computer says, no time. So I think a universal basic income is the way forward. And what I did say to government was, we know it's expensive at first. So if you want to trial it, use the Liverpool City region, and we'll see how it goes, because we've been a test bed for many things, not just the likes of mass testing and for the rollout of the pandemic, of the vaccine during the pandemic, but also of other pilots as well, such as Housing First, which is about getting homelessness people into a house of their own, and then providing them with the wraparound support so that that individual can get back to a normal life. And I think UBI would be absolutely essential as part of that if we were to roll that out as a wider scheme across the country.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. Just looking at some questions from our audience, and by the way, now's your last chance to sort of submit any more if you want to grill our panelists more. One from Stephen Hesketh: in addition to the Mersey barrage scheme, what other renewable energy schemes would the candidates support? So I'll go to each of you in turn. Perhaps Gary, do you have ideas about that at this stage?
Yeah, we do. I mean, the Mersey barrage is a scheme that was, I think it was first vaunted at the last kind of mayoral elections, and it's kind of, you know, we do support clean, green, renewable energy that is reliable, but it's a big project, it's an expensive project, and it's going to come with some ecological damage, and it will take some time as well to build. We've been looking in terms of like alternatives to this. We've been looking at the lagoon, like a tidal lagoon just off the Sefton coast. Okay, so that is something amongst other things that we are looking at to see how what we could develop. If we had to come to a sustainable, individual and community oriented fair and equal society, I think we need to have a more ambitious plan to get there. So in addition, Liverpool City region has got like such tremendous potential to build a sustainable green community economy with clean renewable energy at its heart. And in addition to the entire Liverpool Bay area, it has some of the largest tidal ranges in the world. And this shouldn't be limited to what could be a technically problematic Mersey barrage. I would suggest that we should be seeking investment to build like a Sefton tidal lagoon stretching from around Southport Pier in the north to where the Mersey Channel turns out to the sea near Crosby. So the idea of this lagoon has been positively evaluated by the Swansea Bay team. And, you know, it would also provide additional flood defences to numerous communities that will be under threat as the weather becomes more unpredictable and the seas inevitably rise, and as we transition into the future. And in addition to this, wind turbines could also be incorporated into the actual structure of that building. And here is a major innovation. You know, we could use a proportion of its output to generate true green hydrogen from green electricity and seawater, and then use that power to power a fleet of green buses and pollution-free lorries that would transport containers from the port without contaminating our local air with health-damaging and various nitrogen oxides. So we also believe that the community could have a stake in this energy as well. So another exciting option would be to look at maybe a local community-based green investment bank and facilitate community ownership and community private partnerships as appropriate. And in that way, local people invest directly and via their local councils to gain a dividend from the green economy and green jobs. Just on the hydrogen issue as well, the plan for the lagoon also incorporates at quieter times like nighttime to electrolyze the water and create green hydrogen. There are three different types of hydrogen. There's grey, there's blue, and there's green. And green hydrogen is the hydrogen that is produced from clean, green, renewable energy. It's not reliant on the fossil fuel industry. The buses that Steve has been talking about that are coming quite soon, hopefully, well, they're actually still powered by blue hydrogen, which is still reliant on fossil fuels being refined, being dragged out the earth and being burned. Although the emissions from the buses are like oxygen and water, it's still heavily reliant on like the fossil fuel industry, which we want to move away from.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Gary. I think we were talking about this in the Greater Manchester session earlier as well, about the need to drive this sort of renewable energy and this low carbon sort of agenda through greater involvement of the private sector and sort of incentivization of businesses to actually set up in the Liverpool City region and, actually kind of do more of the manufacturing and production there. So Steve, I wonder, what would you do if you were re-elected? So not just looking at the government funding side of things and what could be got from Whitehall to help fund these schemes, but actually how would you encourage businesses in this space to set up in the region?
Well, I'd carry on.
And if you can name, if you also have any direct answer to Stephen's question as well about specific projects that you might support.
Just on that, I'll go on to some of the things that we're doing with the private sector. But see, this is part of the problem when myths start to abound. I never said the Mersey Tidal barrage. It's a Mersey Tidal project, and the project has not yet been determined because there's an independent commission of very, very clever people. So the likes of our universities, we've got an independent chair who was the person who was there on day one when Barebow Bank was constructed and then left it as Europe's largest offshore wind cluster when the government was saying that the strike price wouldn't make it viable for offshore wind to wash its face. And of course, not only is it, the price is right down now and it's very, very viable. So we've got all of these people, including people from the National Oceanography Centre, who are looking at all of these things. And we haven't decided whether it'll be an offshore lagoon or some sort of tidal barrier. But it's interesting, the one thing that we have rejected is the onshore lagoon that Gary's talking about because of the ecological damage that it would do. And of course, if Gary wanted to see how planning works, then when you start to talk to Sefton people about putting an onshore lagoon in their area, you just watch the reaction that you'll get from those people who don't want anything touched on their beaches. So we're looking at...
can Gary come in and respond on that
Yeah.
before? Because I'm aware we need to wrap up soon.
I mean, the Tidal Lagoon project... Yeah, sorry. The Tidal Lagoon project has been brought forward by the Sefton Green Party. So people who are members of the Green Party. Yeah. Well, no, they don't, but they do live in the area. They do live in that community. And so they are like, it's not something that we're looking at from the outside, but working within the community and with people who live there. And they are, clean, green enthusiasts who have come up with the idea in consultation with, experts from the Swansea Bay.
Thanks, Gary.
Swansea Bay obviously is a failed project, so they're not experts in Swansea Bay. We've got proper experts who are looking at this in detail to make certain that it passes the 3 stages of a business case that has to be submitted to Treasury. And so we will take, as long as this takes us to get the business case right. But part of what we're looking at is exactly what Gary was talking about, which is hydrolysis, which is creating green hydrogen from tidal energy, which is what we want to do. But in the interim, and this is part of the problem with the Green Party, I find a lot of the policies attractive on the face of it. But when you dig down, it's about purity and nothing's ever good enough. So hydrogen buses that are using blue hydrogen, well, they're much more preferable, aren't they, than the sort of gas guzzling ones that we've got, which are spewing out toxic and NOx into the air at this moment in time. So whilst we move towards the perfect solution, we don't want excellence to be the enemy of good. We can't always be perfect on everything that we do. So we're working with Cadent HyNet on a scheme which is putting hydrogen, it is hydrogen capture, so it's the blue stuff. But we're putting hydrogen into the gas supplies, and we're going to pilot that in St Helens. And the idea is that they don't know how much you can put in before there is the potential that the appliances might need to have the elements changed. And anybody who's old enough like me to remember what happened when we moved over from Town Gas to North Sea Gas, somebody had to come to your house, and it was blokes at the time. So some fella came to our house, my Mars Council house in Kirby, and they had to change all the elements on everything because it was a different type of gas and a different temperature, and it ignited differently and all that sort of stuff. So we
Steve,
don't want to do that, but we've got Cadence who are doing something there, and then of course there's Glass Futures, which will decarbonise the energy intensive industries. So we're doing an awful lot on hydrogen in the city region.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Steve. We've run over. I'm afraid, Gary, if you want to make a 30-second point, that's it. That'll be it.
Just on like. Yeah, thank you. Just on Steve's note about, this is the problem with the Green Party. Like, well, this is the problem with the Labour Party. The arrogance that assumes actually you are Sefton people. Well, actually, the ideas came from Sefton people. And in terms of like nothing's ever good enough. Well, listen, it is a massive leap forward to have the buses, even if it's blue hydrogen. But we need to start moving away from our reliance on fossil fuels and digging that stuff out the ground. So the plan is to leave the existing blue hydrogen scheme in place for now, as certainly as you appear to have thought about how to integrate at least 20% into the domestic methane supply, but eventually begin to move away. This would wither, as we begin to move away from true green hydrogen, which isn't.
I'll tell you what. I need
to wrap it up now, Steve.
No, only because Gary said it's arrogance. What is arrogance is no one better than the democratically elected council in Sefton, and they are the people who make decisions democratically on behalf of those people, and they're the people I support.
Okay, all right. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, everybody. We have run a little bit over, but we've covered so much ground. So hope you've all enjoyed it, and it's given you a bit of an idea for what our candidates are about and what you can expect. Depending on who's elected. Thanks so much to our speakers for their comments and views, and to our audience for your probing questions. And thanks again to our sponsors, BECG and Savills. Please do stay around until 5 o'clock for the rest of the event's networking, so you can continue making contacts and doing business. Our next Place Northwest event will be Industrial and Logistics on 31st of March. You can register for that via our website, placenorthwest.co.uk. So thanks so much again for coming today to everyone, and we hope to see you very soon.